Hi poetry lovers, welcome to my channel Bella Poetry. My name is Bella and I love beautiful poetry. The purpose of this channel is to introduce poetry lovers like yourself to most famous poets and poetesses of different times. I will dedicate the next few segments to the female poets of the 19th century, which was called the Victorian era, and the poets that wrote during this time were called romantic poets. They basically wrote about love, nature, feelings, death, and so forth. So we will start with one of the most famous poets of that time, who was born actually in America. Her name was Emily Dickinson. Emily Dickinson was born in 1830 in Amherst, Massachusetts, which was not far away from Boston. And she had an older brother, William Austin, and a younger sister, Lavinia. Emily was born to a very prominent family who were very vested in the education of their children. Both Emily and Lavinia attended a school for girls that was adjacent to Amherst College. Actually, Emily's father was a trustee of Amherst College and a lawyer, and her grandfather was the founder of Amherst College. So both girls, Emily and Lavinia, received wonderful education. They were well educated in sciences and literature. Emily was known as a wonderful and very zealous student, very pleasing, very cooperative. Later, after they completed school, Emily went to college, but after 1 year, she decided to leave the college and go back home, and she never went back again. She suffered from some cough and she felt lonely. I think that basically this was the beginning of her social anxiety that kind of intensified with the years. So what did Emily do at home? Emily took care of her ailing mother. Her relationship with her parents was not very good. Her father was authoritarian and strict. The family was Calvinist, very religious. The mother was cold and unemotional. Emily herself wrote about it. Later, when Emily was taking care of her in later years, their relationship became better and warmer. What else did Emily do when she got home? Emily loved baking. She loved gardening. And she wrote many letters to cousins, to friends. And in those letters, she included also her poetry, because one of her main pastimes was writing poetry. Actually, during the lifetime of Emily Dickinson, she only published 10 poems, and she wrote in excess of 1,800 poems that were found after her death by her sister Lavinia and by her best friend and the wife of her brother, Susan Gilbert. The poems were published and never went out of print. And today, Emily Dickinson is as famous as she was after her poems were published in 1890. So what happened to Emily with time that actually kind of reflected in her poetry? Emily began to isolate more and more. She refused to leave her house in the next 15 years before her death. And she basically didn't even go out to her father's funeral. When her father died in 1874, Emily did not attend it. Her mother died in 1882. Both parents passed away from a stroke. And so Emily wouldn't even talk to people. When people came to visit her, they talked to her through the door. So her social anxiety seemed to intensify and get even worse. And I think due to the fact that she never left her room, or hardly ever left her room, she started to suffer from various ailments. She had seizures, and people suspected she had maybe epilepsy. She also had bad back and poor vision, and she finally passed away at the age of 55 in 1886 from a stroke, just like her parents did. So what did Emily write about? Emily wrote about death because she was traumatized by the death of her cousins and some friends that died very young from typhus, tuberculosis, and other diseases that were very rampant at that time. She also wrote about nature. We know she loved botany and she loved gardening, so she had a lot of poems about nature. She wrote about religion, being a Calvinist, and she also wrote about love. And so we asked, how did she write about love when she never got married or had children? She was probably in love a few times. I don't think it was actualized love. I think it was more platonic love. We know that towards the end of her life, she had somebody, a judge, an older judge, whose name was Otis Lord, that people say they were romantically involved, but I, again, don't think it was physical. I think it was more platonic. And people even talk about her unique relationship with her sister-in-law, Susan Gilbert. We know that Susan Gilbert was her best friend from school, and she stayed her best friend until her death. She actually said the eulogy over her grave and helped Lavinia. Together with Lavinia, they published her poems. There were also some letters that Emily Dickinson wrote to Susan that were romantic in nature, but again, in my personal opinion, I don't think she really had a relationship with her, physical relation, because Susan was married, they were religious, there were always people there. Emily was not well physically, so I think it was more in her imagination, but we'll never really know. So today we will read 3 poems, some of the most famous poems that Emily Dickinson wrote. And the poems are called, the first poem is actually quite sexual. It's called Wild Night. Wild nights, were I with thee. Wild nights should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in port. Done with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, oh the sea. Might I but moor tonight in thee. Very beautiful poem. The next poem is called I Am Nobody, Who Are You? I am nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there is a pair of us. Don't tell. They advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. And the last poem, I think it's very, very beautiful poem. It's called Hope. It actually became a quote. If you check quotes by Emily Dickinson, the first line will appear. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Well, that's it for today, dear poetry lovers. I hope you learned something new and in this segment about wonderful poetess Emily Dickinson and her story, her poetry. And I really hope that you'll visit Bella Poetry Channel again. In the next segment, we will talk about another very famous, wonderful poet of 19th century, an English poet whose name was Christina Rossetti. Hope to see you again. Have a wonderful day.